It's a few minutes past 3. We can start with the housekeeping pieces anyway. So welcome to our DFI webinar. We have had a little break for a few weeks, so it's really lovely to be back and be connecting with all of our alumni and potential new students again as well. Thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder that the webinars are recorded, and the idea is that we will then share that with all of those that missed out today. And just also, second reminder, when you go to the very bottom of your screen on Zoom, you'll see a little function called Q&A. And please pop your questions into the Q&A function. That will help both myself and Ignacio with making sure that we answer all of your questions as the webinar comes to a conclusion. So without further ado, I'm not going to talk because you're all here to listen to what Ignacio has to say today. So I'm going to hand over to Ignacio, who's going to give us a really interesting insight into the financial strategies and coping strategies of the poor. So over to you, Ignacio. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to the DFI community. What I'm going to say today is very much my personal view of things. I wouldn't say it's a standard view in the financial inclusion industry, and let me add, unfortunately. So let me just share a few slides that I have. So, wait, these are not slides, that's my email. Okay, here are the slides, you can see them, yeah? I have a photograph here of, I don't want to talk about the poor who are in the foreground in the photo. I don't want to talk about the rich who are in the background. I want to talk about all of them. And I really want to convince you of one simple thing. We all follow the same general strategies, but how to survive financially, but how we implement those strategies varies very significantly. And if there's one thing I would like you to take away from this seminar, one plea, personal plea that I have to you is don't judge poor people with how they manage their money. Don't be thinking that the way you manage your money is better. Don't be thinking that you know what is best for poor people, because the reality is none of us know. We cannot put ourselves in their shoes. We follow the same broad strategies, but we implement them very differently. I know this is not the standard view in financial inclusion where everybody marches to the drum roll of financial education, which presupposes that someone is doing the educating. It presupposes that someone knows what is right for them and what is not right. I don't share that view at all. And let me give you a couple examples which are related to financial management, but not really. One of the things that most shocks those of us who come from privileged backgrounds, who were not poor, when we go visit poor communities, low-income communities in developing countries as much as in developed countries, is that they seem to be spending money on stuff that you never did, that your parents never did. My parents never bought me a Coke, a Coca-Cola. My parents never bought me a bag of crisps. And then you go to poor communities and you see parents doing that routinely, and you say, well, if my parents didn't buy that Coke for me, why are you, who have a lot less money than my parents did in their day, why are you buying this stuff? This is very dangerous thinking, because then it tends to make us validate the fact that we're not poor and they are, because they make bad decisions. That is not the case at all. Let me explain to you why my parents didn't buy Coca-Colas for me or bags of crisps. And that's because they had much better ways of rewarding me when I got good grades at school or when I behaved well. And that was by taking a ski trip. We would go to the mountains and go ski. If as parents, you can take little holidays with your parents, what can possibly be the role of buying a can of Coke? Absolutely nothing, because the reward that you're giving with the ski trip is much bigger. Therefore, it doesn't make any sense for my parents to buy any Cokes for me. But if you're poor, the amount of money that you can use to reward your children is much less, then why not buy a little can of Coke on Sunday evening when you go out with your kids to the park, with your family to the park? You're rewarding them for something, for good behavior, for good grades or whatever, and you're creating a family moment, which is what families are all about, little moments in which we have special feelings towards each other. So buying a can of Coke works in their context. It didn't work in the context of my parents. The strategies are the same. The objectives are the same. And that's basically two. One, reward. As the wage earner in the family, you want to reward your family for all the sacrifices that everybody's made. You've made sacrifices. Your partner has made sacrifices. Your kids have made sacrifices by going to school, getting good grades, not being able to buy the things that their schoolmates can buy, and so on. So give them little rewards. And secondly, create little memorable family moments. And that's the purpose of going to the park and buying an ice cream and stuff like that, which my parents never did for me because they never had to, because they had much better ways of creating memorable family moments and rewarding all of us. So that's an example. What I call the coping strategies are the same. Creating the for financial services as a whole. So what should guide how you manage your money? Well, essentially, why can't I? Okay. That basically is around money's key concerns people have around their money. And there's really three. Whether you're rich or poor, there's really just three. One is, where will the next dollar come from? That is really more of a concern of those who are unsalaриed and with variable income. So less perhaps for you and me. Where will the next dollar come from? If you ask poor people about their financial lives, this is what they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the spending. They don't want to be talking about the budgeting on the expenditure side, the can of Coke or anything like that. What they want to talk about is where will the next dollar come from? Because that's the income side is really what creates the possibility of an expenditure side. So income comes first. Those of us who are salaried don't have to worry about this. Second question I have, okay, I know where the next dollar might come from, but how can I keep on doing certain things? How can I keep on keeping my children in school month after month after month, coming up with the necessary school fees? How can I keep on making that little agreement that we had in my family, which is I bring meat once a week. We are a once a week meat family. That's a little promise you've made to yourself and your family. That is in fact your marker of economic success. The fact that you've promised yourself some regularity, yourself and your family, some regularity on certain things. So how can I keep on doing them? How can I keep on saving a little bit for when my children get married and I need to pay for weddings and so on? And the third financial concern is what if? Yeah, okay, I may know where my next dollar is come from. I kind of have a plan for keeping my children in school and the meat and all that. But what if I have an accident and I can't earn any money for the next month? What if my daughter gets sick? I need to take her to the hospital. So these are people's money concerns, whether you're rich or poor. Now, you'll experience them very differently, obviously, but what other financial concern can there possibly be? So understand that all of this, the answers to all these three questions that I posed as financial questions are essentially, it's a little bit more, but essentially at the core of it is balancing discipline and flexibility. Discipline for the future and flexibility in case things just didn't add up. And so it's more about the present. Now I have a need. In the future, that's flexibility. In the future, I will have needs. That's discipline. So balancing flexibility and discipline is the essence of all financial management. So understand how differently you see these questions or the approaches you take if you are someone on the left with formal. So it's not about being rich. It's about having formal stable income, where your risks are accessible. You kind of risk that you lose your job because you kind of know where your standing is with the boss. You kind of know the financial performance of your company. You kind of have news on whether there's going to be a recession in the economy or not, versus informal and irregular incomes, where you have large and uncertain risks. You just have no way of knowing whether tomorrow your business is going to be there or not. So let me just emphasize how differently you look at the at the question of how much flexibility and how much discipline, with how you look at that if you're on the left or on the side. So if you're on the formal and stable side, you basically, let's call them monthly wage earners. The first thing you do is you develop specialized portfolios. I'm going to have some flexibility money that's called current account, and I'm going to have some discipline money that's called a time deposit or savings account. So that's what you do. You separate your portfolio and you just manage how much money you dedicate to flexibility versus discipline. Fine, that's what I do. But you cannot do that if you're poor, because you do not have enough money to separate between flexibility and money and discipline money. Every dollar needs to be doing both. Every dollar needs to be discipline money when you don't really need it and flexibility money when you do. A great example of that is saving in a cow. A cow is mostly about discipline, but hey, if your daughter gets sick and you have a huge medical bill, you can sell the cow anytime. The cow doesn't preclude you from flexibility. It has a lot of mechanisms, mental models and stuff like that leads towards discipline, but you can always undo that. Whereas a time deposit, you cannot, or at least not without a big penalty. So don't ask people to separate their portfolio. Every dollar needs to be doing both. Second, if you have stable income, since you know what your income is going to be, you can afford to be deciding what your specific goals are going to be. You know how much surplus you can extract every month. And then by putting a very strong mental idea around that surplus, that reinforces your will to save, because I want to buy an iPhone. And so, of course, the more you associate the idea of savings with iPhone, the more you're going to be succeeding in your plan to save for that iPhone. Not if you're poor. Not if you're poor. Because the reason why it works for rich people or stable income people, the iPhone idea, is because if you don't achieve the iPhone, it's simply down to you, because you didn't behave the way you wanted to. You did not commit to what you did not stick to what you committed to yourself. But if you're in informal, irregular income, that goal may never come, not because you were weak, but because the circumstances were not right. The income was just not there. It's none of your fault. So what's the point of guilt tripping you? Which is the idea of the iPhone. Why guilt trip myself that I didn't get my iPhone after I set my heart on it if it's not really my fault? So they keep fuzzy goals. The money I'm saving for a purpose, I'm calling it a goat, for example, but goat is not really the purpose. When I have enough goats, maybe I'll buy a fridge, maybe I'll buy a TV, maybe I'll buy a bicycle. I don't need to individualize that goal until I have enough money, until I can afford to individualize. And the second reason why fuzzy goals work for poor people is not only because why guilt trip myself to that extent. So if I thought of it's a fridge or a TV or a bicycle, well, I actually hadn't set my mind on anything. So if I don't achieve any of them, it's okay, because I hadn't really decided what I was going to get anyway. Whereas if I only have one goal, I feel worse about myself. So why put yourself in the situation of feeling worse about yourself when you're not really necessarily fully responsible for it? And secondly, why is one goal more motivating than three? Which is the dogma around all financial management people, that one thing is more motivating than three. No, because if tomorrow's a hot day, I'm going to be thinking fridge. Tomorrow I have a bad commute day, a long commute, I'm going to be thinking bicycle. And if tomorrow I'm really bored, I'm going to be thinking TV. Three things are more motivating than one. So poor people tend to have very fuzzy goals. By that I mean they have a strong idea, they want something, but they don't set their mind on one thing until they have enough of that money that it looks very likely. At that point, they lock in that fuzzy goal, convert it, individualize it into something very specific, because now it's under their control to achieve it. As you can see, all of this basically is leading up towards the traditional budgeting that we kind of expect poor people to do. Doesn't really work for them, because budgeting is about separating money into different purposes for specialized portfolios and having specific goals. But let's continue adding differences between the left and the right. If you are stable income, richer, and so on, you see financial management essentially as building assets. Not so for people. Poor people don't care about assets. Poor people care about liquidity. It's about cash flow. Where do I get the money that I need to deliver the food this week that I promised my family? Where do I get the money to go to the hospital? So it's about liquidity. Now, whether that liquidity comes from an asset that is mine or not is not that important. It's not a primary important thing that the liquidity come from an asset that I can sell or pawn. No, that's just one coping strategy. Another one is to borrow from friends and family. So they're much more interested in liquidity, much less on building assets. Why? Because that's simply the reality of their financial problems. It's all about liquidity. It's about where will my next dollar come from? How do I keep on keeping my children in school? What if I need money to take my daughter to the hospital? A fourth difference is that on the right, and it really follows from the previous one, is finances are fairly private because it's just between me and my assets. Whereas on the right, sorry, on the left it was private. On the right, it's liquidity options can come from things that I own, that I can pawn, as much as from relationships that I have, people, my boss, my neighbor, and so the concept of finance is much more social. A budgeting exercise that is just about me and my money, by definition, will miss a lot of the picture. If you have formal stable income, monthly income, planning is very infrequent. Why should you plan frequently? Because there's no new information. You'll get your salary at the end of this month and the next month and the next month and the next month. So just do a budget, perhaps at the end of the year, or perhaps twice a year, and stick with it. Planning is very infrequent. In fact, the more infrequent you make it, the better. Because if I just read it tomorrow, the budget that I did today, all that I would do is undo today's commitments. So planning is infrequent. It's a very special thing. Whereas if you're poor, planning around money is constant. You constantly have to make decisions. Why? Because every cash flow that comes your way, there's new information. Oh, today was a good day. Today I make more money than usual. That's new information. There's no such new information on the left because, my salary will come at the end of the month. And is it going to be the same salary? Maybe I'll get a promotion, but that's only once a year. Then I'll redo my budget. So for poor, irregular income people, it's constant decision-making all the time because every time you get money, it's new information. Equally, every time you spend money, it's new information. Today, there's new information. My daughter got sick. That changes everything. Or even, there's new information. Today, my daughter didn't get sick. That's new information as well, which you didn't know the day before, that your daughter was not going to get sick. There was always that risk. This is really important. And that's why for poor people, money is such a big deal because it's constant making of decisions, whereas we put our decisions on autopilot by having infrequent plans. Those plans that we make are also fairly abstracted. We have a bank account or several bank accounts or whatever, but then we do the planning outside of our money. And that's on a little piece of paper we call budget, an Excel spreadsheet. So the planning around our money is abstracted. Whereas for poor people, abstractions don't work. They're likely to be less educated. Things are very literal when you're poor and less educated. And so your decisions are acted out. And that's why you will plan at the same time as you're moving money. Because I'm moving money from this jar to that jar. I'm buying a goat or a chicken. These are vastly different financial decisions. So you are making decisions by moving money around, by shifting money around. You're acting it out, which is why asking poor people to develop an abstracted budget view that they're meant to stick with it, that it is just about them and not social, that is focused on assets and not on liquidity options, that is focused on having concrete goals and not fuzzy goals, that is about specializing your money and not by having money doing multiple duties, really is not going to work for them. It's bad because you're not only making them learn a new thing, but you're undermining their traditional way of dealing with problems. Obviously, on the left, budgeting is an analytical process. It's a bunch of numbers. On the right, so because it's abstracted, because it's infrequent, you can afford to spend more time thinking about it and being more deliberate. And yeah, I'm going to spend so much on this and so much on that and on the other. It's very analytical. And at the end of the day, the budget needs to add up, which is the definition of analytical. Whereas if you're poor, you can't be so analytical every time you're making a decision that you need to act out. So instead, you go on autopilot, not by having one plan, one budget that you stick to, but rather by having certain rules of thumb. If today I made a little extra money, this is what I do with it. If my daughter gets sick, this is how I tend to get extra money. And so you act much more by rules of thumb that you yourself cannot really explain. But the point is not that they're really the best. The point is that allows you to be operating without the wear and tear of having to make constant decisions, because you kind of resort to the same solutions under similar situations. And those rules of thumb, there's basically three things that are important. First is hierarchies. You maintain hierarchies. Hierarchies of assets that you're going to pawn. Which one you're going to get pawn first, second, third, if you need money. Hierarchies of debts that you are going to be repaying if you can afford. First, I'll repay the uncle, then I'll repay the neighbor, and then I'll repay my boss. Hierarchies about things that you might want to buy if you come across liquidity. First, I'll buy this, then I'll buy that. And so by having this worked out sense of hierarchies, it really simplifies your decisions because you just go down the list. Routines. Routinizing everything is a great rule of thumb. This decision of buying meat once a month, that is my marker of progress, is great. I don't have to be re-questioning every week whether I have money, whether I'm going to dedicate enough money to the meat or not. Let's just settle on that. Yes, it's a routine, that's all. And then narratives, creating ideas, stories in your mind that help you make all these decisions. And these three things work together. For example, I'm very big on the idea that the main way that people on the right make decisions, if you're informal, irregular income and poor, is by creating a moral hierarchy of your money. You assign a certain moral value to different types of money. And then when you come with a certain expenditure, you try to match it to the morality of the money. So for example, if my daughter got sick, is it legitimate for me to go into the school fees jar? Well, yes, because those things are of a similar moral hierarchy, or maybe not. You decide that. And that's where the narrative comes in, to create a morality around different types of expenditures, different types of money, and then you match. If I want to go out drinking with my friends on Friday, no, I will not go into my school fees jar, because clearly that's a different moral level. And so that's how all these seems to work, according to me. So that was just to explain the differences, which is why you should never, ever pass judgment on how people manage their own money. So these are the three problem statements. This is what creates tension in people's financial lives, one of these three, or all three at the same time. And so you need coping strategies to deal with these. And just to keep it cute, and I think it's fairly complete, there's only three ways you can do it. There's only three coping strategies. And I'm using the word coping strategies not to mean products and services or practices, but rather high-level strategies. And the difference between rich and poor is that we'll do these coping strategies in different ways using different products. So what's the first coping strategy? I call it income shaping. And that's something we never talk about in financial inclusion circles, because those of us who are salaried don't need to be talking, because our money, income comes pre-shaped. It's once a month. But poor people are always thinking about this. In fact, it's the main, if you get a poor person talking about their finance, this is what they're going to be talking about first. And this idea that, yeah, I care about my total income, but not only about my total income, but also about the time profile of my income. I want to have enough monthly income to cover my monthly expenses, but also want daily income to cover my daily expenses. And I also want some windfall income for big things that I may need to buy in the future. And in fact, if the time profile of your income exactly matched the expenditures that you want to incur in, then there would be no need for finance. So finance only arises to the extent that you don't have a perfect income shaping strategy. We don't. We have a monthly income. I'm assuming most of you do. Those of us on a monthly income don't have a perfect income shaping because we do have to spend some income daily, some income quarterly or whatever, or annually for Christmas shopping or whatever. But we have enough tools to deal with it. So our income shaping is not perfect. But that is the objective of poor people. And that explains something you may have wondered, which is why do poor people have so many income sources? Why do they have so multiple jobs? If you have one job, why do poor people have three? It's not efficient from an economic point of view. If you concentrate on the one with the highest rate of return, do that. Why do you have three? Well, it's because they want incomes of different frequencies. I am a farmer. My main income is quarterly when the crop comes in. But then I will have my wife perhaps do something with the monthly income. And my kids will then be selling some stuff at the bus station, some pastries or whatever that we cook at home to create some daily income. Or we're going to buy a cow because the cow produces daily income, the milk that the cow produces. So they're always trying to balance the time profile of income. That's the notion of scheduling the liquidity. The second one, and I think I'm doing it in the importance for poor people, not what you do or what I do, but poor people. The second I call liquidity farming. The liquidity farm is a virtual farm that we all have in our heads. And in this virtual farm, I have all the people and all the sources from which I can extract liquidity if I need to. So instead of being a bunch of vegetables, you might be in my virtual farm, in my liquidity farm, because I know that I've planted you in my liquidity farm by befriending you, for example. I fertilize that frequently by giving little gifts to your children on their birthdays and so on. Why do I do that? Because if push comes to shove, if I need liquidity now, I can go to you because you're in my liquidity farm and you're going to give me some liquidity. That's called social capital. So social capital, business relationships, how you deal with your boss, with your richer relatives and neighbors, with your friends, that's liquidity farming. And that's essential to how people manage their money. And the third one is the idea of bottling liquidity, which is, you can think of it as savings, but it's much more than savings. It's creating little capsules where I capture some liquidity that I can dispose of at different points in time. And I call that animating money because each of these bottled liquidity, I will associate some kind of mental model on, of the sort that I was saying before, a little idea of what type of money this holds, what sort of purposes it is meant to be for. In other words, what kind of moral value do you want to give to it? And then this I'll put in some kind of device or box that fits that story. And that's where informal savings mechanisms are so fantastic, where I can put things in jars, in open glass jars, if it's for short-term quick money, or under the mattress if I don't want to see it so often, in locked boxes, metal or wood with a key. I can give the key to my neighbor, so putting myself distance. So what type of money this came from, what kind of receptacle this is stored in, and what it's used, all these needs to line up in a logical animation in my mind. And that is how I play out the different hierarchy of money classes and fuzzy goals that I have in my mind. So these are the three coping strategies. And now let's just put financial products against this. One is the money guard. This is the traditional way of saving, which is instead of me saving my own money, I'm going to give it to you. because you're someone I trust, or at least someone I want to be thinking that you trust me as well. And so it might be a richer relative, my boss, or anybody like that. Now, in traditional financial inclusion literature, this would be treated as savings. MoneyGuard is a savings vehicle. Well, it's much more than savings vehicle. Yes, it's about animating money, which is why in the chart I have it going towards there. But it's as much about liquidity farming than animating money. Why is it liquidity farming? Because if I give this money to a rich neighbor that I look up to, I know that in a case of need, I can go to that neighbor and ask him for my money back. But because I've demonstrated trust and regularity, now I can also ask him for some more money because he's seen that I'm a good moral character. And so by choosing your money guard, who you choose as your money guard, you'll do it with a view to two things. One is, who is the person that exemplifies the animated story behind that money? So if there's money that for the long term is a big purpose, I'm going to choose someone who's really that I really value a lot, that I respect, who's very trustworthy. I might give the money to David Porteous because that is my best way to associate that money with the attributes of David Porteous. And I would certainly not be going asking for that money to David Porteous on a Friday evening because I'm going to be too embarrassed. He knows I want that money for drinking, so I just won't because it's David Porteous. But equally, I'm going to choose that money guard based on fertilizing, even planting and fertilizing someone on my liquidity farm. Now, David gets to see that I don't go out drinking on Fridays because I never ask him for money on Fridays. He gets to see that I build up money regularly. He gets to see that I don't touch it very often. And when I ask him for some money, I have a good reason for it. So I'm liquidity farming David as much as I'm animating my money. And so what I really want you to get out of this particular part is why I find informal savings financial products so fantastic. And that's because they do multiple duties on this triangle. Informal financial products never do one thing. They do multiple things, which echoes what I said, that every dollar needs to be doing multiple duties. So a savings product that is just savings is a waste of money. It's a waste of financial resource because that money could be building liquidity farming options as well. So if you just put that money under the mattress, it's a waste of perfectly good money. Give it to David Porteous as your money guard, and you're creating more liquidity option. And then there's the ROSCA. ROSCA again, or the rotating savings scheme, the traditional community savings scheme. That ROSCA would be seen in the financial inclusion literature essentially as another savings product. I think that couldn't be more wrong. Yes, there's a little bit of money animation, which is basic savings, because I'm going to associate that money with some purposes that kind of fit the nature of that group. But it's much more than that. It's also liquidity farming, because by joining that group, I know I can get my money back, but if I have an emergency, that group will give me solidarity money back because I'm part of the group. So it's liquidity farming as well as animating money. But I think it's even more. I think fundamentally for the poorest people, the ROSCAs are not even savings. It's income shaping. Because the problem I have is too much of my money is short term. Too much of my money is daily, weekly income from my little business, day in, day out, a little bit of money, a little bit of money, a little bit of money. And putting together these little bits of money into monthly income is hard work to hold it together. What better way than to do a ROSCA? Because the ROSCA turns daily and weekly money into monthly money. Once a month, I get the payoff. So ROSCA may not even be about savings at all. It's about rescheduling your liquidity. So these are informal savings mechanisms. They all work really well because they do multiple duties. And now let's consider a bank account. Oh, there it is. That's it. Animating money. At best, it's money to be animated. At worst, it's just an account that you have no mental association with, no ideas, no animation, and therefore it's money that is very vulnerable. But it does very little liquidity farming. Yeah, maybe they'll give me more credit credit scoring in the future, but I mean, that's so remote, that possibility, and certainly doesn't do anything for income shaping, just putting money in my M-Pesa account or my bank account. So from this picture, you can see why formal mechanisms or digital mechanisms are just completely failing, because they do one thing and one thing only at best. And let me just finish here by saying that in the same way we mapped we've mapped poor people, products onto this triangle, we can put people as well. And let me put here a generic. Everybody will follow their own path within this triangle, but let me put a generic path of economic progress here. When you're really poor, you're at point A. Really, where's my next dollar going to come from is the only thing in your head. And that's why you'll send your children to be hustling, even if that goes against the future because they're not being schooled and so on. This is the most important question. Everything else is hypothetical. And then as you become, a little less poor, I mean, you're still poor, but you're less poor. And the way you feel that you're less poor is because you've made certain promises to yourself and your family. We will eat meat once a month. Our children will go to school with all the sacrifices that entails. And so the question is less about where will the next dollar come from, and more about, how can I keep doing these things that are the things that make me feel that we're not the poorest in town, because the poorest in town are not promising anything to themselves. And then, as you become wealthier, you're meeting your regular needs, you shift towards C. Now your worries are much more hypothetical. Well, what if I lose my job? What if I die? What if there's a hurricane? And so more catastrophic situations, much less likely to happen, but more catastrophic. And so you're going to be buying insurance and building assets and stuff like that. And eventually you're free from that because you have insured everything, and you move back, in my view, if you're super rich, back to how can I keep on? Because your income has grown tremendously, but your needs and your family's needs have grown even more, because now we have a yacht, now we have a house, 3 houses, 5 houses. All these need regular upkeep. How can I keep on paying for these things? So you can see how this triangle is universal. It's universal in terms of the underlying needs, financial questions that people have. Where will my next dollar come from? How can I keep on? And what if? And it's universal in the coping strategies. And what is clear that is, as you go richer, you will tend to go more towards the top. So savings is more the issue. And that's money animating. Building assets is the issue. Much less about income shaping, because, I have a monthly income. Maybe I'll switch jobs once every 5 years. It's a once in 5 years sort of a revision time frame. And certainly liquidity farming, it never really disappears, but it becomes extremely basic. In the same way as in regular farming, we go from multiple crops to monocrop, and that's seen as quote unquote development. In financial services, the same. Who's in your liquidity farming? Well, your bank. And that's what we call a credit score. In fact, not even your bank, the entire banking system, which is your credit score. There's just one number in that liquidity farm. In fact, there's 2 things. One is your credit score, which is shared by all banks. I mean, that's really important. And the other one, which you don't think about so often explicitly, but it's definitely there, is your family. At the end of the day, you put up with a lot of stuff from your family that you wouldn't from other people, simply because you know your family, if push comes to shove, they're the ones who are going to back you up. So you are much more tolerant with stuff happening with your family because they're still in your liquidity farm. But other than that, other than this very rudimentary liquidity farm, and once every 5 years thinking about income shaping, it's all about asset building, bottling liquidity, animating money. So that is what I have. And let me just convince you that there's lots that can be done digitally. And I'm not going to spell it out for you, but I am just going to posit 3 hypotheses. How can we fail at creating a sense of liquidity farming, which is about social connections, when what digital is good at is social networking? how can we not succeed at creating good liquidity farming mechanisms for poor people digitally when we know that digital is good at social networking? How can we not create good money animation mechanisms when digital is great at gaming, creating this pretend views where there's little characters? And how can we fail at creating good income shaping options when we have good task and calendaring things that allow you to schedule things very explicitly? So I see no reason why digital cannot deliver excellent income shaping, liquidity farming, and money animation options, but we're just so not there. A simple bank account achieves none of these things. It's just a bottomless pit of money. And so as long as we keep the discussion on what is the best type of account, we completely lost it. The discussion has to be about how to incorporate gaming elements into user interfaces. How do we include social networking? How do we include tasking and calendaring into the financial applications? And let me just leave it there. Oh my God, I've gone way too long, haven't I? And we can have a little bit of a discussion. What do you think, Sarah?
Wonderful. Thank you, Ignacio. I really enjoyed that. I love this concept that you were talking about of liquidity farming. It kind of also reminds me of what I'm doing in the alumni, you know, like getting works, and not for money, because I'm not going to ask any of you for loans, don't worry. But more about like getting that contact and sharing information, and
exactly.
Everybody knows. And it's like, as you say, it's what we all do, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. But we almost devalue that amongst some communities. So I think I was really intrigued by that concept, for sure. And I'm going to ask everyone that's on the webinar, do put your questions in the Q&A. There's a few in there, and I will come to a couple of those. But I want to ask just one question while the others are all typing, Ignacio. Do you think, and it kind of came to me, like fintechs are often quite good at coming with some more of these products than perhaps some of the bigger companies like banks? And what struck me is that when you're founding a fintech, your monthly income that you would have perhaps had before when you're working for a bank, or that stable income that you get, is different. It goes away. Do you think there may be some sort of connection as to why fintechs are able to be more innovative, because they also now understand that the scheduling system?
I disagree with the premise.
Okay.
I think it's true that fintechs have more of a need to create something that appears new and different, and they worry more about design, appeal, engagement, and stuff like that, which banks completely miss on. So I'll grant you that. They want something that feels different. But I would say fintechs come with exactly the same moral view of what is right and wrong that everybody else. There is no fintech service that I know of that doesn't start with the question of, what are your goals? Well, you're assuming that I have specific goals. No, my goals are fuzzy. And there's a good reason why they're fuzzy. So I think fintechs, their problem is the CEOs and founders of all these things are all MBA educated in the best universities in the world. As long as fintech CEOs come from those backgrounds, they're not going to work.
Okay, well, it's interesting. I wondered whether the unstable income makes them rethink. But you're likely good enough income in the bank already.
They come with a mental model of what they think proper financial management is, and you just look at the user interface and abstract from how cutesy it all is. It is a glorified budgeting tool.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, I agree with you there.
And when it comes to banks and everybody else, including mobile money, we've gone digital, but you could print the user interfaces on a printer. You could staple them, and they would just work perfectly as paper forms, which I think is ludicrous. Why am I not moving money with my finger like this? Why am I entering numbers in little fields and it's all sequential? Why? So I think user interfaces for banking need to look much more like gaming user interfaces than form filling, which is what they all look like.
Yeah. No, I agree. I remember when I used to be saving for different things. I used to call my accounts different names so that I knew whether I was putting it into my holiday fund or
Yeah,
etc. But it
exactly.
was word based, whether it could have been like a really nice picture. I could have actually put a picture of the beach I'm trying to go visit, like instead, and that might motivate me even more than the word holiday.
Yes, exactly. And that works for you. The problem is when they force that on everybody else, because I need to tell you what your income, what your expenditure categories are. And I'm all for leaving that vague. Let
Yeah.
the person project their own. And so one of my favorite product ideas that I have, which I tell anyone, and I've never seen anybody steal the idea, which I would love it, is take a picture. Your user interface, take a picture, and that represents a kind of money. It's a picture. My children are in it. My house is in it. The head of the sign of my favorite bar is in it. Whatever it is, I've created now my sense of what my money stories are, simply by taking a picture.
So despite the fact that we've got all these amazing wider range of opportunities to us, we're still pretty much trying to keep people within that narrow focus.
Because everybody who's in the sector, I regret to say, and I'm sorry I feel I'm saying it so categorically, we feel morally superior. We know what's right.
And we need to educate people to use our product.
And exactly. And as long as that's the case, we're not going to go anywhere.
So anyway, I should make sure I ask some of the questions coming in from the alumni. So we've got a question here from Shaman. Do you think financial technology is important for the informal sector to get access to finance?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, absolutely, financial technology is essential. But what you need to put is something in front of that technology that speaks to people. And that is what we've been discussing with Sarah right now. What can you put in front of the technology? Well, a user interface that is form filling. Well, yeah, no, that's exactly the kind of banking I'm running away from because I don't understand any of it. Or you can put in front a highly trivialized, moralistic view of finance, which is, oh, you need to set some money aside for your food and for your shelter and for your this and for your that. Okay, you're imposing your values on me. That is not how I think about money. So how do you put, what do you put in front of the financial technology so it speaks to me? That is what the real question is. And the example I just gave is, well, just take pictures of stuff that you associate with money. When you do check balance, you'll see those pictures. Click on those pictures. You'll see how much money you have invested in each picture. So that just as an example. So yes, do you need a lot of financial technology, but it should not be experienced as financial technology by the user.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's turning it around on its head, basically.
Yeah.
So Fahad asked, what about the social development aspect? Can fintechs do something? So building on my question, can fintechs do something that connects that in, the kind of the liquidity farming? What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, here's an idea. Maybe it's a bit complicated, but to implement, but it's simple to understand. If I save money, the bank will decide who gets a loan with this money, right? Because the bank is intermediation. They take money from me, they give it to someone else in the form of a loan. Well, what if you asked me who I would want to get my money? And so I might say, well, yeah, I'm saving, and thank you for the savings product, but I mean, it'd be great if Fahad got my money in a loan. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Now I feel that with my savings, I'm also liquidity farming Fahad because he'll know that my money went to him through the bank. And then the bank and I perhaps can reach some agreement on risk sharing. Obviously, the bank shouldn't give you a loan just because, but perhaps they'll say, yeah, okay, understand that if you're earmarking your fund to someone, maybe you'll be responsible for 10% of the loss or whatever. We'll do, or perhaps we do a credit score on Fahad, and because you marked him, we'll give him 10% more. And through that, not only so for me as a customer, I'm liquidity farming Fahad, but from the bank's point of view, they're getting my view on Fahad because I trust them because my money is now at risk. And so instead of doing the credit score purely on individuals, why aren't you much more interested in looking at the relationships between people and doing the credit score on the relationship between people? Don't just look at Fahad and and his money, look at what his friends say about Fahad. Do his friends point him as someone who they would want to get his money or not? It's a win-win.
No, that's really a really interesting concept. The idea of that for more formal financial organizations are able to tap into that social relationships.
That's right, and that, by the way, is you start from intermediation. At the other end, you have P2P lending. This is kind of going somewhere in between. The bank doesn't do P2P lending, but it's taking into account P2P relationships, and so you're kind of filling that gap a little bit without being a P2P lender that does intermediates you.
Yeah, and then it gives the institution a better picture of everybody involved in the process for help move that forwards. We have a question from Franklin, who just says, can you just throw a little more light on the income shaping? He didn't quite get the concept.
Right, so you have farmers, and their main business is farmer, except that they might spend some time with a side business, because once a week they go to market and sell stuff. And you say, why are you doing this second job? I mean, I would ask you, sorry, what was the name of the person? I forget.
Franklin.
I would ask you, why don't you have a second job? And the right answer you should give me is because, well, if I had two jobs, one would be better paying than the other, and I would just drop the one that is less paying and concentrate on the one that is better paying. That's the economic rationale for having one job. Pick the one where you think you'll get maximum returns in a time, not just now, but in the future, and really build on that. And that's a form of specialization. We specialize our income side by concentrating on one job, trying to do the best possible and banking on that. But when you're poor, people don't do that. They have 3 or 4 jobs. I'm a farmer. I can plant more stuff, but instead of planting more stuff, I'll also have a cow. And you go, yeah, but why don't you choose which is the better rate of return, whether the crops or the cow? Like, no, they don't think of it like that, because I don't have the cow because it has a higher rate of return. Most likely it actually has a lower rate of return, maybe even negative. Cows may have 0 rate of return, but you still want the cow because it produces daily income. You feel like I'm getting a little bit every day to match daily expenditure. So if my quarterly income for my crop, I have to wait a long time, maybe it's not going to be there, but in the meantime, I know I can feed my family because the cow will produce daily milk. So it's this idea of creating multiple time profiles of cash flows, of inflows, and not just reduce everything to what pays me the most. So when you choose incomes, it's not based only on rate of return, ROI. It's based on what gives me most peace of mind, what gives me most assurance that I will be able to incur different expenditures, some of which are daily, some weekly, some monthly, some quarterly.
And I guess, like, looking at school fees, they're often paid once a year. So having something that would give you money at that particular time, just as school fees are due, would be an example of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so the traditional school fee saving instrument is a goat, which takes multiple months for it to grow. Maybe not, you won't spend the whole year on it, but 3 months and done, goat. So here you will want to create income that is, if you pay school fees quarterly, for example, that comes once a quarter. Failing that, you will buy a goat, which will then produce that quarterly income. So at that point, it's animating money. So if you cannot fully schedule your liquidity to arrive when you need it, then you'll manufacture that by choosing the right financial instrument.
And I think it's really interesting when you were talking, about how tiny a bank account would be in terms of being able to manage all those three things. That a formal typical bank account really does not meet the needs of many people. And Fahad is talking, here around, trying to change things as a DFS player, but obviously then, some of the bigger DFS players are held back, I guess, by not wanting to create, bad debt. How can the banks get involved in this kind of sector? and I'm sort of changing Fahad's question slightly, but how can they expand from just this tiny thing to something bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me broaden the question even further. Is in financial inclusion, we tend to have the assumption, which is completely untested and undiscussed explicitly, that everybody needs all financial services. But why? Go back to that triangle. When you're at the bottom of the triangle, it's mostly about income, which is what Fahad is saying. If as a bank, you don't have an answer to that, you cannot create income for people, well, maybe you are not so essential to people's lives. But somehow we want, because our thing is financial inclusion, we want to think that we're essential to everyone. Well, not essential to everyone in the same degree at the different points in their lives. We just need to accept that. Savings is just not a big deal when you're worrying about where my next dollar is going to come from. Insurance is not a big deal when you're worried on how can I keep on rather than what if. Everything has its stage. And that's why the informal mechanisms work so well, like the ROSCA and the money guard, because they cover all of these things. So the same instrument works for you. The same ROSCA mechanism works for you when you were worrying about where my next dollar is going to come from, because it's a form of liquidity, of income shaping. It works for you when you're thinking about how can I keep on, and it works for you as an insurance. Well, what if? And so that is what's so great about the ROSCA, that different people, it's one product, but different people are using it for different reasons. And that's why it's so universal. When it comes to formal, we have this lousy habit of specializing things. In fact, any description of financial products, formal products, is going to start, is this insurance, is this savings, or is this lending? Okay, you just killed it, because every financial product needs to have a potential of animating money, a potential for creating options for liquidity through liquidity farming, a potential for rescheduling some of my cash flows. And so that's what I would say, Fahad, is like, first, don't think that every product is for everyone. Second, build products that meet the needs of many people. And so you have simple products delivering really vastly different user propositions. And frankly, and it's something I keep on saying, this is what digital is all about. It's like Facebook. It's the same Facebook that I use, that Sarah, you use, that Fahad uses, that my nephew uses. And yet we use them for vastly different reasons in vastly different ways. As you know, I'm not very big on social networks. So I have a voyeur account. I just use it to research on people. It's a voyeur account, that's all. You use it for something else because you're building a network of professionals. My nephew wants to chat to his friends, but it's the same thing that is able to house our multiple needs. Why? Because it's not a product. It's just a collection of tools that we can use in different ways.
So you think that if a bank could somehow shift its mindset to be more like Facebook, it could actually operate in this space?
Eliminate products. Products are the enemy. Create an experience where people can manage some combination that suits them between animating money, income shaping, and liquidity farming.
And we're just about over on time. So there's sort of one last thing I kind of want to come back to, is this concept of, and I think people are saying, disjudging. It's easy to say that we know the best way, as you were saying, and that people need education money, because I don't have that worry, like you said, on a daily basis anymore, thanks to DFI paying me on a monthly basis. So I think, we need to come back to remember that judgment, and not passing judgment on other people, and not assuming people know little less than us. There's often reasons, very valid reasons for people's behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go even further. If you feel as a provider of a product that your customers need to be educated on it, it's a marketing failure. Because your product failed to communicate how it's relevant to them. So instead of changing your product, you're wanting to change their minds. That's not going to happen. Electricity for people to take up electricity, it didn't require education. For people to take up, and electricity is a good thing. For people to take mobile telephony, and that's a good thing, it didn't require education. For people to take up everything that they like, it didn't take up education. Now, we have this other thing that they think they should love, which is financial services. But we think they need education. So so when that happens, to me, it can only be one of two things. Either you were targeting the wrong people because what you think is going to change their lives, really it's not going to. Because you keep talking on savings when they're stuck at the bottom of that triangle with where's my next dollar come from, and they're just not paying any attention, and nor should they. Or they really could benefit, but you've not designed it in a way that it speaks to them. And that's the user interface question. Instead of having an account that means nothing to people, I send money to a picture that I've taken. The picture is the repository of my money. Now it speaks to me. So when you need financial education, either you're targeting the wrong people, or you're targeting them with the wrong product or with the wrong service, I should say. That is where I would go, because I know of no other sector that demands education before private providers can sell to them. Coca-Cola certainly didn't ask for education.
Yeah, I mean, nobody teaches us how to use Facebook or LinkedIn. I mean, unless you're using them maybe as a super user, and I know I've had to learn a few things managing the group, but as an individual, it was easy to sign up and use and go and enjoy. Yeah.
Let me say that what I'm saying here is, of course, fairly controversial, not the standard view. And that's why, let me just say, this is why I keep these views to a seminar. I don't project these views as very strongly in our courses, because our courses are meant to be more the standard view. Whereas, that's the value of seminars, to be able to express more personal views.
Absolutely. And I think it's really lovely to be able to have these conversations, and just, if people agree with you or disagree with you, it's at least opened a really interesting channel of conversation and maybe made us all think a little bit differently. And that is the whole point of learning and continuing to grow on our journeys together, is just think a little differently than we did yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no real disagreements. They're just challenges, right? I mean, yeah.
I've really enjoyed the session today. It's made me think differently about a lot of things, and I'm seeing a few messages from the community saying they've really enjoyed today's session. So thank you very much for taking the hour with us today, Ignacio.
Sure.
So, and we look forward to hopefully hearing another scheduled webinar with you sometime soon. And community, there's another one scheduled on the 24th. If those of you who are French, that will be one of our new French webinars, and another on the 3rd of October. So keep in touch with in the League of Digital Finance on LinkedIn. Make sure you're in part of our network for your liquidity farming. And also check out our DFI web pages as well, which has also got our upcoming webinars too.
Right.
So thanks everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.